Welcome back to another edition of Reviewer News Network. I'm your host, Runestone. Tonight, our major story is a follow-up on the disappearance of niche internet nano-celebrity Kit Katastrophe. Involved in the infamous kidnapping of Mav Station nearly 2 years ago, this Transformers reviewer has kept a low profile ever since, and dropped off the face of the earth 6 months ago. We go to our on-the-ground reporter, Funyun Rob, for an update on this mysterious story.
Kit Katastrophe. He first appeared out of nowhere in late 2018 as an amateur Transformers reviewer. But did he really? Allegedly, his online presence began as a little-known figure named Leader Starboy, a name which he quickly abandoned for being way too fucking cringe. He slowly amassed a following over the years and involved himself in the great Discord wars of 2019. After receiving plastic surgery to get everyone to stop calling him a femboy, he seemed to have flown off the handle, kidnapping and allegedly torturing fellow amateur reviewer Mav Station, which Kit later described as a burst of Sigma energy. As of April 2023, he has had total radio silence for the past 6 months now. Eagle-eyed fanatics have spotted him in public, but after every sighting, he is impossible to reach. The question remains, where is Kit Katastrophe? Will he ever return? Will he actually have a proper upload schedule? We may never know. Back to you, Rune.
What the hell is Sigma energy?
It's been a long time, hasn't it? Shoot, this has been my longest hiatus to date. Hopefully I keep it that way. Not that I owe any of you an explanation, but I like to keep you guys in the loop. These past few months have seen the single greatest shift in my life so far. When you last heard from me, I was a broke college student filming videos in a cramped closet in the precious few moments I had between homework and assignments. Now, I'm writing this script in my own office in my own place. In my last review, I promised that I'd be taking a look at Prime RC. As the time between videos stretched and stretched and stretched some more, it started to seem less and less appropriate a subject. As the 4-month wait turned into 6, I felt that something special needed to be done for my grand return. What better subject than the bot whose face I took as my own? Today I'm going to answer a few questions people have been asking me for years. So without further ado, welcome to Kit Katastrophe. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Dark of the Moon Deluxe Class Air Raid. This figure was released in 2011 as part of Wave 5 of the Deluxe assortment. Have you ever noticed that skyfaring Autobots don't tend to turn into fighter jets? There are obvious exceptions, of course, such as the 4 limbs of Superion, but most Autobots with airplane alt modes tend to be more supportive or secretive in their nature. Powerglide turns into something more akin to a flying tank than anything else, Stratosphere from the upcoming Rise of the Beast turns into a bomber, and Jetfire, well, every time he shows up, he's a different kind of plane altogether. So it's not very surprising that Air Raid here is ill-equipped for dogfighting as well. His choice of disguise is a radar plane that is, dare I say, cute. The Boeing E-767 is no small bird, and seeing it reduced to deluxe size is kind of comical, especially given how faithfully the plane is represented. I'm not some kind of scale purist or anything, but setting him down next to Bumblebee is kind of hilarious. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the only figure I can think of who would scale nicely with him would be Revenge of the Fallen Stratosphere and his tiny Optimus companion. Of course, when I say represented faithfully, I'm mostly talking about the proportions, as to my knowledge this plane doesn't actually feature these massive intakes on top of the fuselage, nor does it have a big grubby hand sticking straight out the back. This is pretty indefensible, but there's definitely no room in the tail for it to fold away. Oh, I guess that means it is defensible. These horizontal stabilizers do the opposite of what their name implies, as they don't so much as soft detent in place, let alone lock, but the elevators and rudder have some gleaming silver paint, which is also used on this long stripe running down the fuselage, neatly separating the bright grassy green topside from the murkier bottom. It even helps hide this exposed off-white hinge. You just don't see such a level of care taken in deco work anymore, especially when it comes to stripes. Looking at you, Ironhide. The cockpit is especially special. Not only is the paintwork exquisite, but there's also a clear plastic insert for the cockpit windows, along with a cute Autobot badge up top. Last, but certainly not least, Air Raid features deployable landing gear, one wheel up front and two behind. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Rotodome. Air Raid here turns into what is commonly called an AWAC plane. Essentially, it's a flying radar station used to detect other planes, missiles, etc. The Boeing E-767 Air Raid actually has a rather interesting backstory involving a Soviet pilot defecting to Japan. Go look it up. This huge dish, called a rotodome, houses the radar equipment, which allows this plane to spot hostile bogies with ease. The Dark of the Moon toy line featured a gimmick called MechTech, which involved giving each figure a weapon which would automorph into a more unwieldy weapon by pulling a switch. Frustratingly, only the weapons of Voyager-class figures actually locked in their other configuration. I'll have to revisit this line again sometime, as Air Raid's weapon isn't typical. Its primary mode is this rotodome. Pulling on the rear automatically converts it into a very unconvincing blaster. Releasing the switch springs it back into its radar dish form. There's a spot just above and behind the cockpit to place it or any other 5mm weapon, as well as two more underneath if you flip out these side panels here, or even the two ports under his wings. But Air Raid's dish is meant to clip on what will become his feet, using the 3mm clip system Haztech were so fond of using back then. Sure, the post sticks out underneath, but that's the price you pay for versatility. With most jet formers this size, you'd more often than not find most of an entire robot hanging underneath. This problem is so persistent, it's seen on figures such as the Combiner Wars aerial bots, the original movie Starscream, and even on someone as recent as Legacy Needlenose. Air Raid, however, is remarkably clean. Just forget the hand for a moment. From below, the only visible robot mode chunk is the front face of the torso, which barely hangs from the fuselage and even serves as a housing for the rear landing gear. It's frankly amazing just how realistic and grounded the designers were able to get this vehicle mode at such a small size, and with so little room to work. Surely this means the transformation is either super complex or brilliantly clever to achieve such a feat? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Neither complex nor clever are words I would particularly use to describe this scheme, but I think I'll hazard a unique. It's certainly panel-heavy at the start, asking you to unpeel the fuselage where it meets both the cockpit and the empennage. This frees up the bulk of Air Raid's mass to blossom like the flower he is. The legs unfurl over the top and around the wings, though on my copy one of his hips is more than a bit gammy, so I have to be extra careful. More on that later though, as Air Raid's arms split easily. There's nothing holding them together by themselves, the legs naturally did all the legwork in that regard. In what seems to be a foreshadowing of Prime RID's penchant for dynamic head reveals to finish off the transformation, the cockpit folds up to form Air Raid's spinal column, in turn raising his head into position. I can't name a single other figure in the entire Dark of the Moon line that employs automorph outside the weapons, so one wonders if there was a bit of cross-pollination going on here. Air Raid doesn't look like a typical Bayformers design, does he? He and Skyhammer from the Voyager assortment are not just the only two Autobots, but only two designs, period, from the entire main line that are completely original. Between the two of them, I'd say Air Raid sticks out like a sore thumb. His design is full of straight lines and smooth curves, with the only real greebling found on his torso detailing and exposed bone-white limbs. Part of me is really starting to suspect that, as one of the later Dark of the Moon figures released, his overall design was influenced by the Prime RID line, which was already in full production by the time of Air Raid's release. I have absolutely nothing to support this, just a hunch. I'd like to know what the rest of you think about this hypothesis down in the comments. Overall, I'm getting something of a Rodney Copperbottom vibe from him. He's very straight-laced, he keeps his head held high, and okay, it's really just the big mohawk. This head design also doesn't quite fit the movieverse aesthetic. It's far too clean. They've certainly attempted to meld it into the familiar aesthetic, but I don't think it's all the way there. Probably for the best, too, since a typical Bayformer's face would have been a bitch and a half to turn into an avatar and a faction symbol. And here's the question that I've been asked many times. Out of all the Transformers designs to base your entire online presence around, why Dark of the Moon Air Raid? Well, it didn't start out that way. For the first 2 months of my channel's existence, I simply used a generic Decepticon symbol with a generic black and purple color scheme. I mean, I guess things haven't really changed much, huh? I needed a figure to use as a butt monkey of sorts to demonstrate firing missiles, spring-loaded gimmicks, and the occasional Despacito tornado. Well, my childhood copy of Air Raid had a hip joint which would fall off at a moment's notice, so I felt he was an apt choice, and so my affinity for Air Raid was born. Shortly thereafter, I appropriated him as a sort of mascot for my channel, and that eventually turned into the avatar you see before you now. It also helps that literally no one else would ape this design in a million years. So hopefully that ends the mystery once and for all. FYI, my character's name is Wavelength, and he's a Decepticon. The astute among you in the audience will notice that I have 2 hands, while Air Raid himself does not. Instead, he has the entire plane's empennage stapled to the end of some more exposed bone as a makeshift flail weapon. To complement this, you can place his rotodome in his other hand and fold the handle down on its hinge to form a shield. Looking at him now, it's clear to see inspiration from Roman gladiators, with his golden mohawk emulating Roman plumage. That flail is on 2 joints, one at the wrist and the other at the beater. Coupled with his articulation, you can probably get some decent action poses out of him. A month ago, I would have led that into a snarky line starting with, or at least you could in theory, and would have reiterated that my copy had a hip joint which was more than happy to disengage like half my audience does during my introductions. You know who you are. But of course nothing else goes to plan with these videos. Somehow, the figure fixed itself! It's as if it's an employee who's checked out of his job so he slacks off, playing on his phone during company hours, until his supervisor comes around, or in this case, until I decide to review this damn thing, and suddenly he's as productive as ever! I mean, maybe I'm looking a gift horse in the mouth here, but what the fuck else am I supposed to make of it? I suppose the only thing left to do now is talk articulation. Air Raid here has 16 dedicated points of it, but if you throw in a couple useful transformation joints, you can bring that up to 20. Of course, I am counting the 2 joints for the flail. That said, there's not much noteworthy about said articulation. The elbows are incredibly limited with the arms in their prescribed configuration, but rotating the biceps 180 degrees gives them the equivalent to a double joint. If you're okay with an exposed mushroom swivel and don't mind the scruffy arm molding, then by all means use this. Inexplicably, Air Raid has a ball-jointed wrist that allows this change to look natural. It's a shame there are no joints at the ankles, but that's in service of the stability of the rotodome's truss. At least his knees look funny when you bend them. And now, here's the moment of truth. What will I give Dark of the Moon Air Raid on my arbitrary ranking system? Well, before I answer this burning, dire question of yours, I must say that there's no possible way I could even flirt with the idea of objectivity when it comes to this figure. It's become a part of me. Nevertheless, in order to live up to the reviews part of the title, let's recap. Air Raid has a unique vehicle mode with tons of realistic detail and great paint work, even if the overall result is a little sloppy in places. He transforms dutifully enough into a robot that stands out from the entire rest of the Dark of the Moon line for reasons elusive but suspect, and has a distinctive gladiatorial play pattern that I find cute. On the galactic scale, Dark of the Moon Air Raid gets the distinctive honor of the rank Literally Me. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future. If you have a request for a future review subject, then feel free to join my Patreon. Who knows what we'll be looking at when we return? Who knows what the future will bring? I just hope I'll be here for the ride. This has been Kit Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.